working yet? Okay, just making sure.
All right, good morning. My name is Chris Guile. I'm a senior manager with our security assurance team at Amazon Web Services. I manage a lot of our programs. And one of the teams is our public sector compliance programs, which includes FedRAMP, DoD, CJIS, and programs like that. So I'm happy to come up and talk with some friends of ours about ATO in a day, just to make sure you all are here for the ATO talk, right? That's like
y'all love A&A, right?
Standing room only in here, yeah. All right.
There's no free beer, though.
Yeah.
Just FYI, no free beer. Sorry.
All right, just want to make sure. All right, doors are on that side. So anyway, I will let Scott and Sebastian introduce themselves, and then we'll get into what we're going to do here as a fireside chat and talk through ATO in a day. So, Scott?
Okay, I'm Scott Kaplan. As of Friday, I am the new chief for cloud security at NGA. My background here, I've been with NGA since 2003, both contractor and government, so I understand both sides of the fence. I spent the last 8 years actually in the ops side of the world, before that in the computer security side of the world, and now I'm back because I love the A&A process. But what I found out is the team that started this and what we're going to talk about with ATO in a day-to-day, it's not my success right now. It's Jason Hess, who I'm replacing, it's his vision, and it's my team that has been doing this and getting it to this point. But what I learned about it, and I hope to share with you today, is I'm passionate about the vision because we need to get there. And so we'll continue on with that, and I'll let Sebastian introduce himself.
Sure. So Sebastian Taffanel, and I don't think I'm on. Am I on?
Nope.
It has a little green blinky light.
I can lean like this.
Am I on? Good. So Sebastian Taffanel, I've been in and out of the community for a long time. Some of you are recognized. I served both as an on-site support contractor for the folks at Langley, not the Air Force Base, for well over 8 years, where I did security engineering, security architecture, system architecture, enterprise architecture, primarily focusing on really hard cross-domain problems, as some of you can attest. And that was the kind of the entryway, if you will, to kind of, hey, what else can we do? What else can we innovate on? August 2012, I decided to join the startup world. Evident.io is my second startup. We exclusively focus on cloud security. As part of that conversation, I also realized that Scott and I have actually walked on each other's paths multiple times. We go all the way back to 2004, where I served as a federal ISM for the International Programs Office at NGA, and Scott was coming on board as a certification engineer. So if you see a little bit of bantering, that's why.
So we're here to talk about ATO in a day. And obviously that is quite a journey to get to the point where you can actually use the words one day in ATO in the same sentence. And so kind of moving back to the starting point of this, Scott, I'm curious to learn a little bit more about, well, what did that process look like before you could claim ATO in a day?
Well, I'm sad to say it's not completely gone. The A&A, I'm sure many of you, how many here have put a package through the A&A process? Okay, a good chunk of you. So you understand the pain. I've also had to do that on the other side, trying to put a package through. I knew it should have taken 4 weeks. Took 14 months. Yeah, sound familiar? So the way I look at it, so the old way of business, you build a huge, massive system. You say, I want to give this to the government. And at the very end, you go, OK, come and test it. And that was the way it was always done. And we'd come in as the testers and go, you got this finding, this problem, this problem, this problem, this problem. And you're like, oh, OK. I guess we got to go back and fix that. So that delayed. Oh, by the way, now we need this piece of paper. And we need this piece of documentation. Oh, and I need this documentation. And the way I've been looking at it and listening and talking recently, and not to hit on the process, but it has gotten better over time in NGA. They've gotten faster, but not fast enough. It's still a lot of a gotcha game, honestly. You know, oh, I've found this finding on you. You got to go back and fix that one. And I hate that. It shouldn't be anything like that. It should be completely an open book test that we work together with you as our partners to get you ready so that on day one, you pass the certification test, so to speak, and we get you your ATO like that. So the traditional way of doing it, which you all know, is going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So where we're headed, and I don't know if you want me to lead into that yet, is that using the DevOps process, and I will talk a little more as we go along about how we've seen that, to speed up. We need to go faster. We desperately need to go faster. And part of that is because, so I'm prior military, I'm sure many of you are, but my thing is it's all about the mission. Really, it's about, I have friends that are on the ground, I know people that have been on the ground, I've been out there. They need what you guys are all trying to provide, and what it's not just a name on a list. It's about making the CNA process, or ANA process, sorry, I'm still old school, the ANA process be able to meet the speed of mission. And we can't do that in today's environment. And the vision that Jason came up with ATO in a day, and how the team has been doing it, we're actually already starting to get there. And I'll talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think, as Scott already alluded to, it's not really new. This is a desire that many of us in the field have wanted to not only evolve into, but really just radically change, right? We understand that the system owners and system certifiers have this kind of, frenemy relationship throughout the process. It doesn't have to be that way. It shouldn't be that way, but unfortunately, in many organizations, it's become that. From a DevOps perspective, we recognize that, moving to the cloud, whether it's public cloud or the classified side of the house, that causes us to rethink how we're doing things. And strictly as a security vendor now, that really causes us to say, well, what do we bring to the table? What can we help with? And that's really more of a, I like to say it's an and conversation, not an or conversation. There are some organizations that have created their own tools and their own solutions, and that's cool if that works for you. There are some organizations that have completely gone commercial procurements to get those tools. And there's some organizations that have done kind of a hybrid. They've built their own tools. They've actually reached out to open source platforms as well, or they've gone to commercial vendors to kind of supply that. And that's, I think, where the majority of the solutions are really becoming to have to gel, because no one is a silver bullet, right? And I think that's part of a myth, if you will. If you're a vendor and that's the way you're pitching it, that's your call. If you're a government entity and you're hearing that from a vendor, warning, that the folks that are really going to help you out are the ones that say, listen, I can't solve all your problems, but here are the problems that I can solve. And more importantly, here's the ones that I don't solve. And that way you, as a government entity, can actually look and say, well, yeah, I need help with that. Can you help me with that? Yes or no?
And I think clearly, just by some of the feedback, we all, I think, have, on all sides of this process, have our pain points and pet peeves and aspects of this process we'd love to see either change or be tweaked. And oftentimes that catalyst is more along the lines of a new requirements baseline or a new framework as we move from DITSCAP, NITSCAP days, and we've transitioned to RMF. And so cloud is obviously a little bit of a different catalyst in that regard. So as NGA has been moving to and looking at cloud adoption within the framework of the controls and the ANA process that we have, how has that been a bit of that change agent for you in terms of speeding up that process for your ATO changes?
Cloud's huge. I mean, if you're not familiar, a couple years ago, our deputy director said NGA would be all in the cloud by the end of 2017. Now, we're still working on that. Will we make it? I get it. But what it provided, compared to the old way of doing it, is it provided the platform to truly do DevOps on top of it, and SecDevOps or DevSecOps, however you want to say it. What I've watched, and so prior, I said I became chief on Friday, but I've been the deputy for about 4 or 5 months now. And what I've watched as I've come in is Amazon and the cloud and the environment, because we're using Amazon C2S, so if you're not familiar with C2S, we're using that environment. It's providing the buzz term I've heard recently over and over is it's infrastructure as code. So we don't care about the hardware anymore. We're not going to say, give us your hardware list, right? That's always the first piece. Give us your hardware list, give you your software list, give you all those other types of pieces in the A&A process. Don't need to ask for that. Okay, you're on AWS, you're in C2S, you bring certain controls by doing that. The inherited controls is a huge piece. Every question I'm asking now to any vendor that comes and talks to me, and I keep putting this out, is by using your product or using your tool, what additional security controls do you bring to the table so that I can make my list ever smaller, 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 so that as we go, because we're doing software now, we're testing software. That's really what's on top of everything. It's not the hardware as much anymore. The cloud's providing that. It's just, at that point, it's who owns the hardware in my mind. And by looking at it from that perspective, then the next step is, the traditional way of doing it is you created this big, huge, monolithic software pieces, along with the hardware and everything else like that. And at the end, again, you said, let's test it. Versus now breaking it down into microservices where we can do, the term was MVP, minimum viable product. What's the minimum amount you need to do to get to your initial ATO, to get you up and operating, and then start doing the continuous development CI/CD cycle of adding components and pieces on that we can continue to test through the DevOps pipeline, using the different security tools, using the code tools in order to check the code at the very beginning. It's what we've always all wanted to do, which is bring security back to the very, very, very beginning of the process. And I'm going to tell my story now because it relates to that. So the story I've talked about recently, so people say, can you actually get to ATO in a day? Yes, I believe we can. Are we there completely yet? No. But recently, we put 5 apps through the DevOps process. First couple were about 3 weeks. We got the second set down to 2 weeks, and I'll talk about one of those. And in a few weeks, we're doing another test where we're hoping actually get it down to a week. Putting an app, which would normally take 6 to 9 months to do, literally to 1 week. And then with the redevelopment through the apps, as you're making the changes into the future and continuous monitoring and all the other components, we could actually do it within a day. So that's how you get down to ATO in a day. So the story I'm going to say is I was out in Denver where we were doing the testing and going through this process, and we had a period of time where we sat down with one of the developers, literally the guy that was coding the app, and we talked about security. And as we showed him how his code was going through the pipeline, and we use ThreadFix as our final tool to show right now the results, we said, here's your findings. See this? This is bad, this is bad. He's like, first reaction was like, well, those are false positives. Really? Okay, cool. Let's mark that as such, and we know that now. What about the others? Well, I can fix those. Okay, if you do that, and you keep going through this, use the tool over and over and over again, and this goes back to the old days where it's like, I'm going to give you my disk on the final day. Please run it 1,000 times before I get there. So you know the answer. You know the results. You're ready to say, here's my POE&M. I know I'm still working on those issues. Those have to be fixed. These have to be on because if they're not, then the system doesn't work. Okay. So I saw a light bulb turn on over his head. And he started doing the coding. So by the time that week was over, he was actually the first one to get an ATO. And he did in 2 weeks. And then the next guy. But I guarantee you, the next time he goes through it, even faster. And the next time he goes through it, even faster. And he's like, oh, I can make a change to my system? Yeah, you can put that and show me through the pipeline that it meets all the security requirements and doesn't affect the system. Or it does, but here's how, and you know how to add that component to it. That's done in a day, in hours, in minutes. You can do it all day long, which is how the big folks, like Netflix and everybody else. I swear to God, I almost said Netscape. Netflix.
He's that old.
I'm like, dang, I almost dated myself. Netflix, that's how they're doing it. They're able to continually update because they can show continuously that they're not affecting the greater security piece of the software, that it's being continuously updated. And it's still maintaining its security requirements, and it's still making it. And when I started learning about that, so that's the reason I came back. So as I said, I was in the ops side of the world. when Jason first came to me and said, hey, do you want to help? And I was like, you want me to come back to computer security? I hate the old process. Sorry, I used the word hate. You said don't use it, but I hate the old process. Highly dislike. I thought it was horrid. The way we did it, the way we worked with our partners, we weren't helping them. We were just playing games with them. It's horrid. And I was like, if you're blowing up that whole way of doing it and using it this new way, and he explained to me, I was like, that I can get on board with. There's a desire for that in industry. There's a desire for that among the entire group of folks because all of it speeds it up. And now one of the things I started focusing on when I showed up is how do I automate the documentation? Because that's another big piece. Where are your delays? It's in the testing and in the documentation. There's massive amounts of documentation we all know we have to fill out the SSP, fill out the SRTM, fill out all these, and you have to have it in multiple different spots. So why not automate that as best as you possibly can? So we have 3 different teams of folks that are working together. So some of the developers that are helping us are Black Sky and Ion Channel. We have folks out in St. Louis from just NGA proper that have their development teams that are looking at that problem now. How can I add that? Because again, if you want to get to ATO in a day, you have to be able to do the documentation as well. Different discussions on the format. Where will it be held? Right now, NGA uses Exacta, so we have to push it all the way through. How can I put it into that repository? Can we keep it in Git in the document so it stays with the code? What type of format, YAML or others, in order to do so to get it to that point? All those pieces are still coming to play. We've been doing this for about a year or less. I think it's about a year, where we started down this path, and so we have a long ways to go, but I believe we can get there, and I believe my team can help us get there, and I believe the partners such as Evident and others can help us get there, but we will do it.
So in looking to introduce some of the change like this, and maybe Sebastian, you can start off with this one, there are varying degrees of change sensitivity, right? Trying to introduce a change in a process like this that people are pretty fairly well accustomed to in the way it's always worked over time. So what were some of those key considerations that you had, or at least concerns that, okay, you're on the ground, you're working with AWS Frontlines, seeing the cloud's impact to the community in this process. So what were some of your key concerns as you were looking to contend with the changes that they were looking to introduce in their process?
Sure. I think first and foremost, it starts with education. We as a AWS partner, we're on the, I always forget how it goes, advanced technology, competency, security, something. We're one of 12 in the world, by the way. And what that really means is that AWS themselves put us through the ringer, their own process, to make sure that our architecture was well architected, that our processes were in place, that our folks were certified, et cetera, et cetera. So that was, us getting educated to be able to work with AWS, first of all. We are cloud native, so we're unlike a lot of vendors who cloudified their applications, right, their solutions. We actually were born in the cloud, of the cloud, by the cloud. And so that gives us a little bit of a leverage that we understand how cloud works, right? Because, by the way, we are 100% on AWS ourselves. So we sip our own champagne. Then it became the process of educating our prospects, our customers, whether they're government entities or whether they're commercial entities that are, dipping their toe into, highly regulated commercial entities, right? Financial sector, health sector, et cetera. And for them, a lot of them, they really didn't really understand, I know how to do security in data center. I've been doing that for decades. But this public cloud thing, I really don't know where my stuff is. Is my data really protected? Back to the hardware question, right? Number one thing is give me your hardware software list, right? Well, yeah, you can get a hardware list-ish. You get to select multiple versions of the software and the running OS that you want to run on that hardware. Awesome. But at the same time, you have to understand, hey, there's this shared security responsibility model that you guys have that AWS publishes and everyone abides by and understands. But there is some confusion as to, I as the customer, as the data owner, where does my responsibility really go down to? As far as security configurations that I can either manually or programmatically create and manage, where is that line? It's a little fuzzy. In fact, this afternoon I'll give a follow-up talk called 100 Different Ways to Misconfigure Your Security Settings. because that's the truth. The truth is that we struggle on how to do that, right? Because with one act of omission, suddenly I left my entire S3 bucket wide open to the world. I didn't mean to do that. That wasn't, I didn't know, or I made a mistake in my CloudFormation template. These are all honest mistakes that happen, especially in the DevOps world. Things have to go fast. And so the whole premise of us being able to help, so where Scott was talking about kind of the application security layer of being automated, right? And that's awesome. We actually come alongside Scott and his developers and help them with the infrastructure, continuous monitoring of the infrastructure settings, because it's the sum total of two. And that's kind of my takeaway message for you guys, is that it's not just your OS and your database settings and your encryption stuff. It's also all the underlying AWS services that your workloads are leveraging to get you to cloud, okay? That's where the piece really, that's where the rubber meets the road, because those settings, especially in a public setting, as you guys know, can be really tricky. I don't need to quote, there's been lots of, on Washington Post lately, about certain entities leaving things wide open. And so just like we are going in DevOps, right? Government's going to DevOps, guess what? Bad actors use DevOps too. So we need to be thinking about that. And how do we think like them, right? And how do we counteract that? How do we really button things down? So if we really wanted to leave something open, there's intent to leave it open. But more often than not, it's not intentional to leave it open. So we need continuous monitoring of the infrastructure. And then right alongside with the previous comment about feeding Exacta, which we ourselves will do as well, via JSON, by the way, we're going to feed, we speak native JSON. AWS speaks native JSON. Exacta is now going to speak native JSON. Guess what? There's a straight pipe, boom. Now, from the developers, from the infrastructure checks, and from the certifiers themselves. So those are kind of the changes that we need to think through and talk about and kind of introduce to each other and say, listen, I come to the party with this. What do you come to the party with, right? And it's again, an and conversation. It's not an or conversation. Mm-hmm. And so that's kind of the mindset, kind of the change management perspective that we need to approach this conversation with. It's not a us and them, it's an us, all of us. It's the CSP, it's the government rep, it's the vendors. We need to come together and have a single conversation about the same problem.
So Scott, evidence born in the cloud, NGA obviously not. Legacy systems, or at least architecture that is more traditional. Your concerns are likely different, and the implications of making a change like this are significantly different. So what were those concerns that you had in rolling out what you saw as Jason's vision originally as your team is implementing that?
So let me make sure I understand your question correctly. So some of the questions on how are we, let's see if I can answer the question. So what are my concerns with the fact that we weren't cloud versus?
Yeah, just interesting change in the ATO process overall. I mean,
it's a big shift. Mm-hmm. It's a complete change in paradigm of how we've done it. Yeah. And everybody knows change isn't easy. It's hard. And I'm watching it because I'm lucky. Our team has folks that are they know this world. It's what they do. It's what they do every day. This is what they live. They understand the cloud and how to bring us into the future. And there's a large portion of NGA that they still have to do it the old way right now because that's the only way they can do it. Because the systems aren't in the cloud. They're still the legacy systems. But we need to help them, bring them along, working across the groups. And he said education. It's going back and teaching them, this is the new way. Here's the new tools. Here's the new way you can do it. Oh, by the way, we can automate what you're doing. And it's not to get rid of your job or anything like that. It's to give you time to focus on more important things than sitting there checking the blocks off every single time. You can take your energy and put it towards a greater focus in the security world. Or think more about the bigger issues of, okay, what are truly other additional vulnerabilities that we're not talking about? Or where can else we focus? So a lot of it is, it's going to be a challenge. I know in this past year, it's been pushing everybody outside their comfort zones a lot. and it creates animosity, it creates some confusion, but I believe that if we work together, if we look towards the future and understand where are we trying to go, and yet for us it's saying ATO in a day, but really what is the end goal? Like, why are we doing ATO in a day? Why do we need to do that? And it's to get the mission done. We're a warfighting support agency. We have a mission that supports we help in the U.S. with natural disasters and everything on that component. We're an intelligence component. NJ's got a lot of different things that we have to do, but if we can't speed up our processes, if we can't get to those, we're never going to be, we're the government, I get it, we're never going to be at the speed of industry, because, and some of the larger folks, but we got to get as close as possible. Because the better we can do that, the better we can ultimately affect the mission, get it done. But again, it's a massive change, and I've watched it. It's been a mind shift for me. It's been a mind shift for others. And I know we're still trying to bring some along. You've got the early adopters, just like any type of environment. You got the early adopters saying, "Yeah, let's go all in," and then you got the next group of people like, "Okay, explain it to me a little more." And then you got the other people who go, "Hell no, I'm never letting go of my
Well, my server,
yes, it's
I like my server a lot.
It's
the key to the cage? I still have that too.
Right. So exactly. So you're going to get those folks, but you need to help bring them along as far as you can as well. It's a big ship that's hard to change. Except everybody, one thing everybody always says: there's a big ship and it's hard to change. And I just said it. But aircraft carriers, honestly, they turn really fast. I was surprised.
So let's talk about the mechanics of change then.
Okay.
And I'm a big proponent for continuous process improvement, oftentimes to the chagrin of my teams, but it's something that I think is really important as you look through this. So in terms of the mechanics of making that happen, and you rightly talked about the different levels of change sensitivity, did you have a champion that was in place or like a central key figure that was your belly button for that process?
Yes. I've been lucky that there's been several that have supported us, and it went all the way up to the deputy director. She was very supportive of what we were doing. The leadership in NGA in different parts have all have helped support the idea because they understand. They understand that NGA has to change and always be changing in order to remain relevant. And so yes, we have had seniors that are all the way up at the top who are impacting it.
So did you find a lot of the mechanics of, again, how you made that change? Was this more procedural in nature? Did you find a lot of technology supporting it? Was it partners like Evident.io? Like, what were some of those key components for that change?
As I see it, and obviously I wasn't there right at the beginning, and I see other members of my team out here. Maybe I should just make them talk. Is the technology aspect? So finally, the technology's there. The cloud provided the start. We wouldn't have been able to do this, honestly, if the cloud wasn't there. By moving into the cloud, it brought all the additional capabilities and tools and the ability to do DevOps that NJ didn't have prior, and we can do it now. So when I heard what DevOps, I know it's from my personal self, in the past few years of hearing that term, and then when I really understood what it was about and what we could do with it, and Sec DevOps on top of it, it was like, wow, we can really, really bring back the ability to improve, or we can really bring the ability to improve this. And it goes back to the story of the developer, because I literally watched the light bulb turn on over his head, where he's like, I can do this at the code level. And I was like, that's DevSecOps. I just watched it happen in person. And if I can get that more and more and more, and other people buy into that, and then we start doing, I know he's out here somewhere supposedly, but like John Nicely, who'll be speaking speaking tomorrow. There he is. So I got to blame him first, just because he said he was going to, make fun of ATO in a day tomorrow in his speech. But it's doing in common across the IC. So NGA, CIA, DIA, we're all talking and saying, hey, if we all do this similar process, we're all starting to use the DevOps process, using the similar tools, that could actually help us finally get to a level of trust in the A&A process and reciprocity across the different organizations. And okay, so maybe your tool's different than this one tool that I'm using. But if I did it, would you give it an ATO? So again, we're even going this next step to make it faster is if John and his team or Tim over at DIA or the folks at NRO or NSA say, hey, you did it this way, well, it's the same way I do it, and you gave it an ATO, and we've already had that conversation about how, you know what, as long as it goes through this process, we trust it, and we build that reciprocity, then it speeds up the process across the entire intelligence community. And then so it's collaborating across the IC. And my past, the job I just came from, that was what we were doing. It was working with I was an organization working with all 5 IC agencies, saying, if we all work together with technology, and in that environment, analysts and collection specialists, could we solve some of the hard problems? And this is a hard problem. It's probably the biggest problem, at least in the IT world, that we've had all along is the A&A process and how to speed it up. So I think we're getting there.
So you can make a lot of changes to process and procedure from an ATO process. And Sebastian, I want to ask you this one, is as you are a consumer of and a user of AWS and providing support and services to customer agencies, what have you seen from an AWS perspective, key services and features that have allowed you to enable that process to meet the speed of cloud, SecOps or DevOps turned SecOps, DevSecOps now? What are some of those key AWS characteristics and services that you've seen and that have helped enable that transition?
There are many. I would say IAM is a key foundational service, right? And all the things, the granularity that IAM provides out of the box. And obviously being an advanced technology partner, we are under NDA with AWS as well. So I know there's even more cool stuff coming down the line, and that helps. Encryption is free. How freaking awesome is that? Encryption is free. It may not be the level of encryption that you specifically or your agency needs, but just for the common user, it's free. Turn it on. It's there. All you got to do is literally just select, please encrypt my S3 buckets. Awesome. That alone would have saved certain entities some embarrassment recently in Washington Post. Just saying. So, the things of
talking about it.
Okay, sorry. What's not them? So at the end of the day, it's really about leveraging what you have. You've got some very granular policies that you can set within VPC, within EC2. You can get really granular with the base services. Again, I go back to the previous comment though, all of those services can be misconfigured along the way, and that's where CloudFormation templates come in. Big promoter of Quick Start or Enterprise Accelerators, as you guys are calling them as well. Big promoter of that. And in fact, within our platform, part of the compliance view that you get when you select that option, we actually make a point to promote the NIST Quick Start. Why? Because if you're starting from zero or you're starting from scratch, you've got something to build from. That's there for you. So how about DevOps being used to come up with compliant infrastructure? Who knew, right? Those are all available for you. And again, not to sound too much like a public service announcement for AWS, but they do have a number of engagements. You can use professional services. You can use, I would highly leverage the SAs and the TAMs. They're very technical. They're very knowledgeable. Dear friends of mine, former colleagues from Langley and other places are TAMs and SAs. They're knowledgeable folks, particularly in the C2S world. In the commercial world, the same. These guys are top-rated guys. Amazon does not hire the level B guys and gals. They're top-notch. And so leverage everything that you have available to you, not only from the services themselves, but also the know-how. White papers. White papers are expertly written. FAQs, very helpful. Best practices. Use the stuff. Literally, AWS and ourselves, we co-wrote, along with CIS, we co-wrote the AWS Foundation Benchmark. We were the only security vendor asked to participate. That's super cool. But guess what? That benchmark right now gives you something to start from. You don't have to figure this out on your own. And I think that's part of the message, too, that even Scott and his team has learned as well. You don't have to do this alone. So if you're sitting there as a vendor, or you're sitting here as a government entity, or you're sitting as someone who's just like, oh my gosh, how do I get started? Ask questions. The fact that you're in this room right now during a summit in DC, and it's 90 degrees outside? Awesome, good for you. You're learning something about what one entity has done, and tomorrow you're going to learn what a second entity has done with regards to moving the ATO process into a much shorter timeline. Awesome. Ask more questions. Come visit Scott, come visit John, come visit me, come visit other security vendors and ask them, hey, how did you help so-and-so accelerate ATO? And don't leave until you get your answer.
And as a follow-up that for both of you is, at Amazon, we thrive on feedback from our customers, and it's a reason why you see the services that come out that do. So as a follow-up to that then is, what else would you like to see from AWS, either from a service perspective or from a feature or a resource? What is something that you see as something that AWS can do more of in supporting your ATO transition?
Well, obviously our challenge right now is being in C2S adds a level of complexity. And bringing in the tools that can actually help us along that. And so I'm just going to blame John now, because they're the lead in terms of bringing in the different tools into the environment. So as we get different ones, so like I know the one everybody's screaming for is Lambda, but we don't have that yet in our environment, but it's on the roadmap to do so. And some of the others, that creates a challenge. So it's really the question I keep asking is, okay, so when are we getting this? When are we going to get that? How does that come into? And then once we have it, then okay, how do we use it properly? But the things that I see that are coming, and things that my team's telling me that, hey, this is going to really help us change what we're doing, gets me excited.
Okay, so you definitely have John and his org to work with in terms of some of that visibility and the things that you are looking for from a prioritization standpoint. Sebastian, how about you from again, working directly with the AWS services? Is there something that you see that would come out of AWS that could help enable that kind of a transition for other customers?
Yeah, I think if I had 30 seconds to sit down with AWS leadership, particularly from the security side, I would say as new services are being pushed out or published, right, I would offer right alongside documentation on the security impact of that service. In other words, how does this new service going to impact my security posture, my risk posture, and what should I be thinking about? Right? In other words, kind of go back to what Scott was saying earlier about the developers developing, right? And he comes up with the final scans, or right before the final scans, as he's moving through dev, tests, staging, and prod. Let's do that for AWS services as well, if we can. And that way, when the service is published, the white paper is right behind it, right? And that way, folks like myself and Scott and John and others are not trying to figure that out on our own, or having to go back to AWS and say, cool service, but what is this going to do to me, right? I know we do that for feature. Product teams are very feature rich, right? And that's awesome. But we also need to think about, hey, how does this affect my security stuff?
But I will put a caveat on that then. The challenge, obviously, that we have is there's lots and lots of supporting documentation on the outside, but we have to move that to the high side.
Right.
Which is the bigger challenge for us. How do we do that constant feed? And if there are updates to it, how does that get fed up to the high side? Because we're working, obviously, in all three different environments on Classic TS.
I appreciate it. That's good. So we've got likely other agencies and organizations that are interested in hearing, again, some of the actual tangible steps that you've taken to make this process happen. And it doesn't happen in a silo. It doesn't happen within just your team. You've got other partners within an organization, sure. Contracting, acquisitions, other teams like that are going to help support that. How have you seen, and how has that worked for you with an NGA, and how might you also let other organizations give some best practice in terms of partnering with other support entities within the orgs?
Oh, sure. There's no way our team is doing this alone. Just in NGA, we have our joint services divisions. They're the ones that are really working the actual DevOps process, where the SecDevOps component, but the DevOps process actually falls under joint services. And it's a new organization. We have, help me, I'm blanking for a second. There's across the board, we have our entire CIOT director. We have there's the cloud services group. Their whole job is to move stuff into the cloud, to move the systems into the cloud. And then we have multiple different partners that are helping us from whether it's a tool, whether it's education, whether it's how we're doing it. there's no way that we can do this by ourselves. It's all about collaboration, and that's a big thing of mine. I'd love to collaborate across the top. I'll talk to anybody, get help from anybody to make it better. But yeah, no, it's not just us.
And I know a lot of us in the security field always lament the fact that we're typically brought in later in the process when things tend to work its way through the pipeline. I would say we probably advocate for the same in terms of working with those kinds of partner organizations, right? So getting the contracts, the legal counsel, those kinds of folks early on engaged to help support transition.
Well, the thing I see is the quicker you get at the beginning, get all the players together to talk, because a lot of times everybody's like kind of after the fact. Oh, well, now we need this one. Well, now we need that one. Versus having just an initial upfront conversation. Now it's hard to do. I get it. But that would help, as well as it's a discussion, and that's the big piece that. So way back when I was a certification engineer, where I was testing NGA systems and helping the country, I worked our industrial programs. That was my first group of folks that I worked with, and I felt horrid. I really did. I felt so bad for the folks. I still talk about it took a year to get a standalone computer accredited. That's why I hate the process. And it came down to when I started seeing that, I'm like, we're not doing rocket science. I know the rocket science folks. They're friends of mine. We're not doing their job. This is other than the testing component, this is a lot of just moving paper around. And we can go so much faster with this. So what did I do? And it's what I've been trying to reteach to some of the folks today, is I actually talked to the industrial partners. I called them every week, every other day. Hey, have you done your documentation? Do you have any problems? Do you have the tools yet? Did you get them? Have you run your test yet? Have you been doing this? Have you run your test yet? Have you been doing this? Have you been doing your paperwork? Have you run your test yet? How many times? Because all I want to help you go faster is on the day that I show up, I'm going to hand you my copy of the disk, and you're going to stick it in your computer, and I'm not going to touch your keyboard because I'm not going to break it. Run the test. Give me the results. I should be doing my due diligence. When I come back that following week or whatever, sit down, write the report. And then it used to be the process where it had to sit in front of the certification authority. And obviously now it's the doors, and they would review it, and they'd take weeks. I'm like, why? It's just a big pad of paper. Why is this taking you weeks to go through? And so I changed the process. I said, I'm going to brief it to you. Here, this. Do you have any questions? Nope. Please sign it. Thank you. And I'd walk out the door. I took something that was weeks, and I did it in 10 minutes. It's the same theory in doing the ATO in a day process. It's taking something that's weeks and figuring out a way to do it faster. And then the next step was to go give it to the DA's office, now the DAO. And I would say, have you looked at it yet? And I'd bug them a little bit, because I cared about my systems and my customers. I cared that their thing was done because I cared about the mission, because I knew what they were designing was to help the imagery analysts get better analysis done, or the next person trying to help our international partner, or the next person doing this. It's important. Why should I sit on it? The great thing I see about the DevOps and SecDevOps process, I don't have to sit on it at all. It automatically goes through the pipeline. It's automated. Automation is what's the benefit that we're getting to speed us up. And let's leverage that. Let's use it. Let's trust it, because that's another piece that's coming down, we have to figure out is we got to trust that what the tools are telling us is right. And if you get to that point, then at the end, if you say, if it comes through and it doesn't have any findings here, boom, you got an ATO. Why can't we do that? I think it's possible, and I think we're going to get there.
So there's likely a lot more explicit things that you've done within the process, and Sebastian within Evan and IDO, the things that you've done to enable a transition like this. And then the time we have left, I definitely want to transition to more forward-looking thoughts. So I'm sure you'll field all kinds of questions from some folks afterwards on the side about some more specific things you've done. But looking forward, two things. What is left to be done? What are your current either blockers or things that you've left to go what rocks do you have left to go kick over? And then lastly is a takeaway that you would leave in the room for agencies who are looking and contending or in various points of the same journey. What would you leave for them in terms of some tips, some strategies, a good takeaway for instituting change of their own within their ATO process?
So I think there's lots to be done. There's a lot to be done still. Am I going to promise we're going to have ATO in a day tomorrow? No. Are we at like 9 months or longer at the moment? That's better than we used to be. Get it maybe down to a month, 2 months initially for like a large system, because with larger systems, to get to an ATO in a day, maybe a bit of a stretch. I'll admit that. But even a month, maybe a week for some of the more medium-sized systems, and for just applications and easy to push through the pipeline components, down to a day. Yeah, we can get there, but there's a lot to do. The documentation side, there's a lot to do. We're just starting down that path. Getting the tools all in place. We're still working on getting the tools up on the high side, getting those in place. Making sure that the training's done for the folks who are going to do it the new way. That's still coming down the pipeline. So we're still early in the process of this, but I think there's a vision to get there.
I think from our perspective is, and there's some folks in the room that remember what we did back in 2007, 2008, very highly compartmented collaboration solution that we put out. It was approved by 4 different IC agencies. The data owners actually signed off. And that makes a bit of a distinction with the Intel community and other federal civilian communities, is that you have this role of a system owner and you have this role of a data owner. And sometimes they're not the same. Actually, usually they're not the same. And so you can convince a system owner that, yeah, DevOps is the way to go, because they're kind of in that. They're usually IT savvy program managers or seniors, and they kind of get that. But the data owner is usually someone who's not. And data owners have a primary rule, right, of order, which is to protect. I want to protect my data. Where's my data going? Who's got my data? Do you have access to my data? So they're very protective. And so I think that's something that we could, really all of us, AWS, us as vendors and security folks, we could really focus on educating data owners on why cloud is actually, in some cases, even more secure with their data. And I think that's a very, how do I say this? That's going to be a lengthy process, but it's something that we could give them live examples of other entities that have put their sensitive data on public cloud and have grave success on it. And that way they could say, well, okay, because let's be frank, nobody wants to be first, right? No data owner wants to be the first data owner to say, yeah, my sensitive data is going on that public cloud. And so you have to be able to deal with that and work through that. And just like we've been talking all along for the last few minutes here, it's all about change management. It really is. And it's identifying the champions who are with you.
And the data owners are part of our team.
Exactly, so there you go.
Working with us.
So there you go.
They don't work for me, but we are constantly having discussions with the folks that are on the data side of the house. And that is a very, very good point. Because as we bring them along, as they understand how the cloud's working, as they understand how the security is going to work with the cloud, how they can then get their data to where they need to get it to faster, using the security that is provided by the cloud and everything else, then once again, it gets the mission faster.
I will say this as a final comment, because I know we're running out of time really fast. I think the next level of cloud services to be considered is cross-domain. So that's leveraging existing cross-domain services that what is it called, the UCDMSO now? UCDSO, thank you. I'm a founding member of the original UCDMO, so thank you for that clarification. New cross-domain services are going to be needed specifically for cloud, not just binary Office-type products, PDFs moving back and forth, but how do we get to the point where we actually trust code moving from the low side to the high side?
Exactly.
We got to get there, guys. We have to get there. Because guess what? It's a lot cheaper to develop on the low side than it is on the high side. And I'll finish there.
Gents, really appreciate your time.
Sweet.
Thanks for your thoughts. I know we'll probably get some questions over on the side, but again, really appreciate you guys'
Thanks for
thoughts.
coming, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.